So our hero's in the wilderness, discovering his inner Bear Grylls as he learns to live in a wilderness, and following in the footsteps of Elijah, the character that he's called to be in the spirit and minister in the spirit and the power of Elijah. So he's following Elijah's example by going into the wilderness, and we're taking some time to unpack the idea that wildernesses are part of God's divine discipleship strategy. And as part of that divine discipleship strategy, there is a spiritual hierarchy of needs that God is taking us through, a discipleship growth program that helps us to move from the beginning to discovering our identity, discovering our destiny, and being the people that God made us to be. And to do that, we've got to learn to grow. And that growth begins by the first layer of discovering a healthy dependence in God, and having laid that foundation, we can go on to discover a healthy security in God, where we learn to be able to walk with God and move forward in God into wherever He leads us. I want to suggest to you that the third layer of growth that we have, if we're going to become healthy disciples, is to discover a healthy relationship in God. Maslow's hierarchy of needs has a third layer that says it's about love and belonging, that once our physiological and our basic security values have been established, we need to discover and establish secure relationships with those people around us. We need to find that sense of love. We need to find that sense of belonging, our, for want of a better term, our place in this world. And as we grow in God, the spiritual hierarchy of needs leads us from having a dependence and learning a healthy dependence on God, through a healthy security in God, to discovering a healthy relationship in God. And we need to learn more about that relationship of being with God. Sometimes we think the Christian life is all about what we do. I've made that mistake for so many years. And it's taken me so many years to discover that actually God wants us to just know Him and be with Him. And whatever we do is actually part of coming out of that place of being with God and knowing God. And the wilderness is a place where we can discover God and who He really is. What we see in our wilderness experiences is that God reveals Himself in the wilderness. So we see Elijah, he goes to Mount Sinai and he has this pilgrimage in the wilderness that leads him to have an encounter with God in the wilderness. And if we discover that God will provide for us, and we discover a sense of inner security of being able to walk with God, then God wants to begin to reveal Himself to us in this wilderness. Part of this is shaped by wildernesses having two different purposes. I suppose what I mean by that is we see that the heroes of faith, when they go into the wildernesses, there's almost two ways that they go into the wilderness. One is that they run away into the wilderness, and one of them is that they're led into the wilderness. So there's two different motivations, is maybe a better word to use, for why people go into the wilderness. And just thinking about that first one, we see that often people run away from trouble into the wilderness. They've discovered that the wilderness is a place of security and safety and being able to be hidden and discovering that relationship with God, the encounter with God. But we see people like Moses, when he's committed murder, he runs into the wilderness for safety. We see David, when he's being pursued by Saul, running into the wilderness to find his safety. We see Elijah running from Jezebel into the wilderness for his own safety. There is a sense that many of these characters, when under pressure, they run away from trouble by running into the wilderness. They become this place of security and this place of familiarity. So in the wilderness, people are running away from trouble to encounter God, meet with God, and discover the security of being with God. And wildernesses allow people to do that. But similarly, we also see that wildernesses are a place where people run to God in a way that they're led into the wilderness by God. So we see Noah, he goes into the ark and God shuts the door, and they have 40 days of rain, 40 days and nights of rain. And there's a sense that God has led them into the wilderness for their safety and protection. We see David, when we first meet him, he's shepherding in the wilderness. And there is that sense of God being with him in the wilderness and shaping his character development in the wilderness, where he learns to fight a lion and a bear and sling a sling. You know, there's that sense of his development and growth before he's anointed comes in the wilderness. Elijah, God first of all leads him into the wilderness after he's confronted Ahab and said there's going to be no rain. You know, Elijah has these two wilderness experiences, one of being led into the wilderness by God, and one of running away from the threats to discover God. But we also see Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. So what we see is that heroes are led into the wilderness by God in order for God to teach them and shape them. There's also a sense of running away from things into the wilderness in order to escape the situation they're in and find the security of God. And sometimes we need to run into the wilderness when we face trouble, when we face difficulties. We need to go to that place where God is and say, God, I'm running to you because I need to get away from this situation to meet with you. Having everything stripped away like we have had in a pandemic is what a wilderness does. It strips away everything else, and there's a sense of the rugged rawness of the circumstances that a place of silence, a place of dependence where everything is stripped away, and in that place of security we have the time to stop, to listen, and to discover who God is. And when we take ourselves into that place and we stop and we listen and we discover, we can actually grow in our relationship by God. I think the times I've learned about God the most have been the times where I found myself stopping and God has downloaded something into my heart and into my spirit of what he wants to say. We were created for relationship. Go back to Genesis and the creation, when God said, let us create man in our image. We see God was walking with man in the cool of the day, as was his custom. There was that sense of God wanted a relationship with us. We are designed as human beings to live relationally with other people. We're not called to live isolated lives. And once our basic needs are met, once we've discovered the security of God, God wants us to discover the intimacy of relationship with him by coming to him, stripping everything away and getting to know him. One of the keys to healthy growth is we can all discover a dependence, we can all know Jehovah Jireh, we can all discover a security in God. But if we're going to push on to fulfill our destiny, we have to know that sense of growing in a personal relationship with him. And the wilderness gives us that chance to stop. In your wilderness, are you able to stop and to just be still and know that God is God?